My grandparents were the only people who ever truly saw me, not my potential, not my GPA, and certainly not the social status I might one day attain. They were Arthur and Beatrice Hayes, the quiet architects of an $18 million fortune built on decades of shrewd, ethical investments in mid-market manufacturing. Their wealth was immense, yet their personal aesthetic was one of quiet, almost austere dignity. They were intensely humble and grounded, and the absolute antithesis of my own parents, Richard and Diane Hayes. I am Chloe Hayes, 24 years old, fresh out of the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and navigating the brutally competitive world of Boston's design scene. I was working a grueling entry-level job as a junior graphic designer, often pulling all-nighters just to make the rent on my cramped studio apartment in the South End. The fluorescent lights of that tiny space felt blindingly harsh compared to the warm, mahogany tones of my grandparents' world. My parents, Richard, a 58-year-old middle manager perpetually complaining about his mid-level IT job, and Diane, a 56-year-old part-time real estate agent obsessed with outward appearances, viewed me, and frankly everyone, through a purely transactional lens. Their primary goal in life was the acquisition and display of unearned luxury, constantly chasing the next status symbol their current income couldn't sustain. Their relationship with Arthur and Beatrice was profoundly toxic. They saw my grandparents not as beloved family, but as an ATM machine, a reliable source of emergency bridge loans, luxury European vacations, investment capital, and subsidized living that never seemed to require repayment. My grandparents, recognizing this mercenary streak early on, maintained a loving, close relationship with me, their sole grandchild, but kept Richard and Diane at a distant, weary arm's length. My small life in Boston felt honest and rich in its simplicity, but physically draining. I would sacrifice my meager savings to take the grueling 5-hour Amtrak train down from Boston to the Philadelphia suburbs every other weekend to visit Arthur and Beatrice at the Everwood Lodge. It was a beautiful, slightly aging luxury assisted living community, nestled among sprawling green lawns and ancient oak trees, where they spent their final, peaceful years. The lodge had an atmosphere of quiet, cultivated dignity. Those weekends were my emotional lifeline. Listening to their decades of stories about the Depression, their early business struggles, painting watercolors of the massive, ancient oak trees on the lodge's sunny porch, and feeling, for once, unconditionally loved and accepted for exactly who I was. Arthur, a quiet man who loved to read philosophy and history, and Beatrice, who had a fierce, vibrant passion for abstract painting, shared their best selves with me, instilling the indelible value of legacy over currency. The moment the dual diagnosis came, Arthur with late-stage pancreatic cancer, Beatrice with rapid-onset Alzheimer's, the clock started ticking in a terrifying, tangible way. My parents immediately descended upon the Everwood Lodge, not in genuine, heartbroken grief, but in calculated, financial panic. They hovered like a pair of sleek, dark vultures around the bedside, their voices hushed but their words razor-sharp, pointedly discussing future arrangements, power of attorney, and asset management whenever I was out of earshot. I recall one agonizing afternoon where Arthur, lucid but weak, reached for my hand, while in the hallway, I overheard Diane coldly asking a nurse, "Are they still of sound mind to sign documents? We need to know the timeline." The only comfort Arthur and Beatrice had in their final months was my consistent, quiet presence, reading to them from old poetry books, holding their hands, and promising them that their values, the importance of creativity, honesty, and kindness, would live on through me. When they passed away within weeks of each other, Arthur first, leaving a void that Beatrice's fading mind couldn't quite register, and Beatrice fading quickly afterward, the emotional void in my life was immense, a physical ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I grieved profoundly. My parents, however, quickly moved on to the next phase. The reading of the will, which they saw as their inevitable, long-delayed crowning glory. We were summoned to the wood-paneled, imposing office of the estate lawyer, Mr. Alastair Finch, a man as old and as meticulous as the centuries-old documents he guarded. The heavy leather chairs, and the scent of old paper felt like a tribunal. The meeting started with somber formalities, but the atmosphere instantly crackled with tension when Mr. Finch, wearing his bifocals low on his nose, reached the core distribution clause. He cleared his throat and announced in his dry, precise manner that the bulk of the estate, $18.45 million in liquid assets, trust funds, and a diversified collection of municipal bonds and blue-chip stocks, was to be placed into a generation-skipping trust for the sole and absolute benefit of their granddaughter, Chloe Hayes. Richard and Diane Hayes were explicitly and definitively excluded from the trust and the will, receiving only a modest, prepaid funeral expense account and a set of old, leather-bound photo albums. The silence that followed was suffocating, then shattered by a sound like a seismic event. Richard, normally reserved and passive-aggressive, roared a primal, inarticulate sound of entitlement, slamming his fist down on the antique mahogany table, so hard the crystal water glasses rattled violently. What? This is an outrage. I am their only son. I am the direct heir. This is a mistake, a legal error. Finch, you need to fix this right now, before this leaves the room. This is my inheritance. Diane, ever the strategic manipulator, regained her composure faster than Richard and turned her focus entirely onto me, her eyes glittering with cold, calculating rage behind a flimsy facade of maternal hurt. Her voice dropped to that sickly sweet, manipulative tone I knew so well. Chloe, she cooed, the sound of fingernails on a chalkboard. Your poor, confused grandparents must have made a terrible oversight in their final, addled state. You are 24. You have a lovely little design job. You don't need this money. You'd ruin it. This is Hayes family property. It was always intended to fund your father's executive retirement and secure our entire legacy. You just need to sign a simple release document, putting it into our joint account. We'll manage it for you, darling. Think of it as investing in your parents' future comfort, which is what good children do. That was the first time the mask completely fell away, revealing the raw, ugly avarice beneath. They didn't see the grieving granddaughter. They saw a poorly defended, naive vault holding their ticket to instant luxury. I looked them straight in the eye, clutching the worn, familiar copy of the will. My voice was shaking, a high-pitched tremor of adrenaline, but surprisingly firm. No, I said, drawing on a strength my grandparents had instilled in me. This money was specifically entrusted to me. I will honor my grandparents' specific, written wishes. Thus began Phase 1, emotional manipulation and gaslighting. For the next few weeks, my life became a relentless siege. My phone buzzed constantly with demanding texts and increasingly vitriolic voicemails. Richard's messages alternated between tearful, drunken pleas. Your mother and I gave up our golden years for you. We deserve this. You are killing us. And outright chilling threats. You will destroy this family if you withhold this. Remember who paid for your college. You owe us for raising you. Diane used social media relentlessly, posting lengthy, self-pitying updates about ungrateful young people who forget the sacrifices made for them, and the crushing burden of family duty, clearly signaling their victim status to our extended, judgmental social circle. The isolation was profound. I couldn't trust a single relative who suddenly appeared, offering support, that was thinly veiled curiosity about the money. I had to change my phone number and email address just to regain basic mental peace. When I refused to comply, cutting off all direct communication, they escalated to Phase 2, legal assault. They hired a cheap, aggressively predatory lawyer named Vernon Krantz from a local strip mall firm. A man whose suit was polyester shiny, whose tie was screamingly loud, and whose ethical reputation was questionable, but his rates were low. Krantz, armed with their angry, fabricated narrative of my financial desperation and history of mental instability, filed an urgent, aggressive petition against the estate in probate court, brazenly alleging I had exerted undue influence over my elderly, supposedly senile grandparents and demanded the immediate freeze of all estate assets. The court, in its slow, cautious manner, granted a temporary restraining order, TRO, on the inheritance pending the initial hearing. Twist 2. The legal freeze. Suddenly, $18 million was legally mine, but completely inaccessible, locked away in a terrifying legal limbo. The psychological impact was immense. I was paralyzed, facing a high-stakes legal battle I absolutely could not afford on a junior designer's salary, against the two people who were supposed to protect and nurture me. I felt physically sick, the crushing weight of their entitlement threatening to crush my independent future before it even began. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. I scraped together every cent of my meager savings and, through a trusted university mentor, hired a sharp, young Boston-based probate litigator, Eliza Chun. Eliza was a strategic genius, focusing not on my defense, but on attacking the legal basis of my parents' spurious claim, expertly painting them as gold-digging opportunists who had bankrupted their own standing. The turning point came during the discovery phase, 2 agonizing months into the freeze. Eliza, meticulously reviewing the original, sealed trust documents, found a specific, devastating addition that Arthur and Beatrice had insisted upon: the codicil. This wasn't just a boilerplate exclusion. It was a final, carefully worded, and profoundly personal message from the grave, written 2 months before Arthur's passing. Twist 1. The humiliating codicil. Eliza ensured that Mr. Finch read the codicil aloud in court during a crucial procedural hearing, the moment etched permanently in my memory as the most satisfying moment of my life. The hushed courtroom listened, the atmosphere thick with anticipation, as the old lawyer's voice boomed across the packed room. We hereby explicitly state that our son, Richard Hayes, and his wife, Diane Hayes, are to receive no portion of our estate beyond their prepaid funeral expenses. This decision is made with deep regret but firm resolve, based on their decades of treating us as mere financial resources, their consistent unearned sense of entitlement, and their demonstrable financial irresponsibility, including the unreturned loan of $50,000 in 2018, which was explicitly given for the renovation of their kitchen, not for investment. We believe they would rapidly liquidate this estate for frivolous consumption, a second, needless boat or a vacation home in a tax haven, dishonoring the values we hold dear. Our assets are intended for Chloe, who has shown dedication, integrity, and understands the true meaning of legacy, not luxury. The court silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Richard's furious, strangled, choking cough that echoed off the high ceiling. Diane's face was a study in pure, unadulterated shame and rage. Her attempt at a composed professional look completely failed. The codicil, explicitly citing their unreturned loan and their intention to buy a second, needless boat, exposed their greed, their consumerism, and their manipulative nature for the entire courtroom, including Krantz, the judge, and the small handful of local reporters Eliza had strategically alerted to the juicy family drama. The undue influence claim instantly vaporized. The document proved the exact opposite. My grandparents had been fully lucid and utterly determined to protect their wealth from my parents' avarice. Krantz, the strip mall lawyer, realizing his position was fatally untenable and desperate to avoid a full-scale, catastrophic public trial that would further expose his client's despicable character, immediately moved to dismiss his own TRO claim. The judge granted the dismissal with a sharp, pointed final statement that favored my integrity. The inheritance was immediately unfrozen. The TRO was lifted. I had won. The $18.45 million was finally, legally, and definitively mine. Richard and Diane, publicly shamed, financially ruined by Krantz's rapidly escalating legal fees, and utterly defeated, retreated into their debt-ridden suburban home. The bitterness was palpable. They expected me, out of some residual filial obligation, to buy myself a mansion, a sports car, and then inexplicably, to shower them with generous gifts to save their failing retirement. They waited for me to fail, to succumb to the temptation of instant wealth, and thus prove their claim that a 24-year-old couldn't manage such a windfall. But I was ready for Phase 3, the ultimate unreachable revenge. My vision was cold, clear, and perfectly aligned with my grandparents' values. The first major asset I acquired was not a luxury item. It was the Everwood Lodge. The assisted living community, which had provided my beloved grandparents with their final, happy home, was financially struggling due to poor management and was on the brink of bankruptcy, scheduled to be sold off to a massive, impersonal health conglomerate that planned to tear it down and build ugly, generic luxury condos. I used a significant, but entirely manageable portion of the inheritance, approximately $3 million, to purchase the entire property, absorbing all its existing debt and assets. I closed the deal in 3 weeks, saving the community, its dedicated, compassionate staff, and the remaining elderly residents who had become friends to Arthur and Beatrice. My parents were absolutely baffled and furious, unable to comprehend the logic of spending such massive wealth on a dying old place, instead of something shiny and new. Then I announced my final, unassailable move. I legally established the Arthur and Beatrice Hayes Arts Foundation, a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization. I endowed the foundation with the vast majority of the remaining liquid assets, a permanent, irrevocable, legally ironclad endowment of over $15 million. The foundation's mission: to acquire and convert the Everwood Lodge into a full-scale, nonprofit center for emerging visual artists, offering residencies, free studio space, and art education workshops for local senior citizens, ensuring my grandmother's love for painting and my grandfather's quiet philosophical bent lived on. The building, the land, the entire endowment, and the mission were now legally untouchable, dedicated forever to a charitable purpose that honored my grandparents' passion and kindness. My parents learned the full scope of my unassailable plan through the local news coverage that celebrated the rescue of the Everwood Lodge and the establishment of the massive endowment. The irony was devastating and complete. The Hayes family property, they demanded, now belonged to the Arthur and Beatrice Hayes Arts Foundation, a charitable entity that was legally firewalled against any personal claims by my parents forever. Twist 3. The charitable blockade. They wanted money for their luxury and consumption. I used the money for a public, ethical legacy that benefited the community. They could never touch a single cent. They could only watch, from their debt-ridden suburban home, as the very property they had planned to inherit was transformed into a beacon of the values they had rejected, now bearing the honorable name of Arthur and Beatrice Hayes, a name forever associated with generosity, art, and the ultimate victory over ugly, grasping greed. My independence was total and permanent. I didn't need to spend the money on myself to feel powerful. I used it to create something beautiful, permanent, and eternally out of their reach. They had tried to claim the money for the Hayes name, and I ensured that the good Hayes name was associated forever with generosity and art, not with their ugly, grasping greed.